Dusk and Her Embrace, The Original Sin by Cradle of Filth. Now, if you're believing that this is a brand new studio album from the band, perhaps a continuation of the 1996 extreme metal classic, you're sadly incorrect. The next Cradle of Filth studio album tentatively is due out in autumn of 2017, at least by the time frame that the band has presented to the world when doing announcements for this project. Now, this is a disc that has a lot of history behind it. It was released in 1996 on Music for Nations, but actually had a version that was recorded and nearly basically complete prior to that on Cacophonious Records in 1995. However, there was a split within the band, and there was a lot of tension and a lot of different problems, both legal and otherwise, with Cacophonious Records, which caused the band to decide to regroup, quite literally, considering they had lost a couple of members, and re-record the album as a better representation of what the band's sound was sort of going and what it was all about. And what you have here in 2016 with The Original Sin is taking the original deck tapes and having it get a nice, production overwash, a nice little bit of updating and a presentation of what this album in its original format in 1995 was really slated to sound like, only in a 2016 age-style recording. So nothing new had been recorded, there's no overdubbing. This is just something where, you had to do a little bit of mixing, a little bit of mastering, have a little bit of fun with some levels, and bada bing, bada boom. But you also have a couple of other things that are present here as well, including the fact that there was a different track listing that was present here. There were a couple of different names, either that or different tracks that were included on here. And really the most notable thing that you're going to see is that the order doesn't seem exactly the way that perhaps you remember it, with Nocturnal Supremacy, for example, being the second cutoff of this album, instead of it going straight into Heaven Torn Asunder. So that's something that you're going to get with this disc, and if you are unaware of Dusk and Her Embrace, the original version, or, well, in this case it would be the Music for Nations version, that's definitely one to check out. It does have a little bit more of a raw sound to it, but the two are relatively equal whenever it comes to a lot of different things. Now, this version will, based off of the technology and based off of some of the mastery, some of the more classic moments of the original version may seem like they got a little bit of a screw job treatment. For example, one of the essential screams that you hear in the Haunted Shores of Avalon do sound a little bit more campy whenever they got the modern day washing. You actually would have expected the opposite to be true, that it would have somehow made it sound a lot more dense and a lot more visceral, but instead it sort of just adds the camp factor a bit. Also, some of the famous lines in Funeral in Carpathia is just not quite as solid, so it's just sort of a little difference here and there. It's really things that only somebody that's exceptionally nitpicky about this particular album are going to, first of all, notice, and second of all, perhaps feel is all of that bad of a thing. For most that are experiencing this album, whether it be for the first time, either that or trying to get a sense of what the original disc was slated to sound like, to see what, if any, changes were really made by the band, and you'll note that there are a couple, whether it be lyrical or some slight compositional differences. This still remains to be an important part of Cradle of Filth's discography and an important part of their history. If you happen to like this band a lot, but have only been a recent fan, one that has only gotten their past perhaps 3 or 4 albums, either that or you're trying to turn back the clock a little bit backwards, but can't seem to find this disc, this is certainly one to seek out, and certainly one to listen to. This is considered to be a very paramount pillar of extreme metal in the 1990s. That era that everybody thought that metal was dead, and that, Pantera was the only saving grace. There was a lot of great bands that were doing terrific things, and Cradle of Filth, with the release of this disc in '96, really exposed to the world that a powerhouse was potentially forming in England. And this is a disc that also sort of transformed the map a little bit for the group, really introducing some of the keynote stylings, and really Danny Filth for the first time on their second album, using his voice as more than just a way to emit emotion, but also kind of using it as a bona fide instrument or as a weapon. This is definitely something where the shrieks will assault you, but if you are familiar with any of their material past this album, which all of you probably are, then this should come as no surprise. It will come as more of a surprise that before this it was not really, used in such a way. All in all, there's not much to really comment about this disc, to be perfectly frank. Most of you understand what this album is all about. You're no doubt checking on this to see if there's any landmark or huge differences from what you had in the past. This is an updated wash. There's a couple of additional demo versions of tracks that you get that are pretty neat for a gothic romance as well as nocturnal supremacy. You also get the Carmela's Mask track that was available in the Coffin version of this album, I believe, back in the day. It was either that or the Digipack. It's one of the two. Forgive me for not knowing off of the top of my tippy-top skull. But aside from that, this is a really nice sort of retelling of the story. And by retelling, I mean it's a nice way to see where the history of this album truly began. It didn't truly begin in 1996, whenever this was released by Music for Nations. It instead began a year before that. And while the tone and the overall philosophy of the sound definitely bears a strong resemblance to the final product that we got from Music for Nations in '96, it's definitely still one that should be marveled at. And it's definitely one that showcases that in '95 the band was already starting to trademark their sound. Not to mention also we're starting to move in a more mature songwriting direction, one that would affect them for years to come, and still affects them by and large to this day. If this is something that you're interested in, it's definitely one to get if you're a collector. It's also one that if you've never seen this album in CD form in stores, it's pretty cool to have. I actually would recommend picking this one up, but still maintain your quest for the original 1996 Music for Nations version. And then you can compare the two if you really want to. This is a group that definitely has a lot of interesting facets to not only their history, but a lot of things that they seem to unearth and release to the world. They're definitely unafraid to really showcase their bold vision. And this is just another example as to why that's the truth. Now, while you may have different opinions about what the band has done in more recent times, either that or you may feel that the band has gotten a bit derivative, whatever it may be, this is still a group that's massively interesting and certainly should be examined. So check this one out.